In this video, we are going to build a pagination system. The idea here is the following. Sometimes you have tables in your database that have too many records, and you want to show the users those records, but there are so many records, sometimes 1,000 records, 100,000 records, or even millions of records, that it will be really inefficient to show all of them at the same time to the user. You will be wasting bandwidth by doing that. Also, you will be wasting server resources by processing those thousands or millions of records at the same time. And besides that, the user will feel overwhelmed by having so many records in the page, which means that it is not efficient to show the user too many records at the same time. And if you're using Blazor server-side, then this could bring down your application because in Blazor server-side, you have the app running on the server, which means that if you have 1,000,000 records on the page, then you have 1,000,000 records in memory. This could make your app crash because of a lack of memory to continue running. So for example, here, in our Blazor application that we have been building, I created about 100 records. And this is too much for the user to see. So we would like to have a system that allows us to fragment or segment these records in such a way that the user can see them, for example, 10 by 10. The user will be able to see the first 10 records, and then he could click on a button to display the next 10 records and so on. So let's do that. For that we have to go to Visual Studio. And what we're going to do can be separated into two parts. The first one is to build a pagination system on the server using ASP.NET Core and Entity Framework Core, and then we're going to go to the front end, to the Blazor application, to build a pagination component that it is going to work with our ASP.NET Core application. Although in this example we are going to work with ASP.NET Core, as you know, Blazor WebAssembly can work with any backend, like Node.js for example. So what we're going to do from the Blazor standpoint can also work for another backend. So let's start with this tutorial. For that we're going to go to the server project, and we're going to go to the people controller, which is where we are serving those 100 people that you saw previously. And this is the action or endpoint with which we want to work with. Here, we want to allow the user to indicate in which page he's currently on, and how many records per page to display. For that we're going to create a new model, a new class, that will encapsulate this information. For that we're going to go to the Solution Explorer, here, and let's go to the Models folder. Let's create a new class. We will call it Pagination DTO. DTO stands for Data Transfer Object. Of course, you can use the name that you want. This class will have two properties. The first one is going to be the page in which the user is in. By default, the value of this property is going to be 1. And the second property is going to be the quantity per page to display, whether it is 10 records per page, 25, 50, etc. For now, we are just going to work with 10 records per page. Now let's use this pagination DTO here. We are going to say pagination DTO, pagination, and because this is a complex type, we are going to use from query here, so that we can use query strings to pass the information of the page and the quantity of records to display per page. Now let's analyze what we need. In order to do the pagination from the Blazor application, we need to know how many records are there in the database. For that, we need to pass that information from our ASP.NET Core application to our Blazor application. So where will we put this data? We can put it in several places. One of them, and the one that we are going to use, is the header of the HTTP response. Because pagination is something that we want to use in several places, we are going to create a method in a class that will encapsulate the logic of getting the total amount of records in a table and putting that information in the header of the HTTP response. For that, we are going to create a new class that will encapsulate this. For that, we are going to come here to the Solution Explorer and we are going to create a new folder We will call that folder helpers, and we will create a new class that is going to be called HTTP context extensions. We are going to extend the HTTP context class. The HTTP context class allows us to work with the header of the HTTP response. And we're going to create then an extension method. We're going to call it insert pagination parameter in response, and we're going to extend HTTP context, and for that we need to bring this namespace HTTP context, and we're going to pass it an iQueryable of t, and we need to use generics here. We're going to use generics because this method will allow us to work with the pagination not only of people, but with any table of our database, whether it is people, invoices, addresses, or whatever. And now let's say queryable, and here we're going to put records per page. Now let's do a count on the queryable. Let's say double count equal to await queryable count async, and let's bring this namespace. With this, we get the total amount of records on that table, and then we can count the total amount of pages. For that, we're going to say double pages quantity count divided by the records per page to show. And then we're going to put that information in the header of the HTTP response. For that, we're going to say HTTP context response headers add, and we can put our key here like pages quantity, and here we will say pages quantity to a string. Now with this information, the Blazor application will know how many pages to display. Now let's use this extension method on our people controller. First, we're going to need a queryable of people. For that, we will say context that comes from the application DB context, people as queryable, and then we will say await HTTP context, insert, and let me copy the name and paste it here and bring this namespace server.helpers, and we will pass the queryable of people and pagination dot quantity per page. Now this is a method that we can reuse for any pagination that we want to do. It doesn't have to be a pagination of people, of course. Now we need to use here the methods skip and take in order to paginate using Entity Framework, because again that is something that we are going to want to use from several places. We are going to encapsulate that logic into its own class. For that, let's go to the Solution Explorer and let's create yet another class. We will call it iQueryable extensions, and we will say static, and we're going to create an extension method public async static that it is going to return an iQueryable of t. We will call this method paginate of t, and we are going to extend iQueryable of t. The reason why, again, that we're using generics is so that this method can work with any data type, whether it is to paginate people, invoices, addresses, or whatever. And we're going to pass here our pagination DTO type, pagination. Let's make this fit in the whole screen, and let's just say return queryable skip, and we're going to say pagination page -1 multiplied by pagination quantity per page take pagination quantity per page. What this is doing is that this allows us to paginate the records from our database. With skip, we can skip some records, and with take, we can take a certain amount of records. For example, if we are in page 1, then 1 minus 1 is 0, so we're skipping 0 records, and we're taking the quantity per page amount of records. If we are in page 2, then 2 minus 1 is 1, and we're going to skip 1 times quantity per page. So we're going to skip, for example, the first 10 records, and then we're going to take the next 10 records, which is page 2, and so on. We actually don't need this to be async, so let's delete this, and that's it. Now we can use this method from here. We can say queryable, because we have to use this queryable, paginate, and we are going to pass the pagination parameter, and that's it. With this, we are using pagination in a reusable manner in our ASP.NET Core application. Now if we compile our application and we go back to Google Chrome, and you can see that here we have all the records, right? Now let's refresh the page. Now you're going to see that we are only displaying the first 10 records, which is fine because by default we said that we want to display page 1 and the quantity of records to display per page by default is 10. So this is correct. Now we have to work on the Blazor side in order to allow our users to navigate through the pages of our pagination system. First, I want to show you how is our pagination going to look like. Here we are in Bootstrap and we are going to use these controls here. You are going to have a previous button, a next button, and you are also going to have the numbers of the page here. But I will not display the number of every single page that we have. For example, if we have 100 pages to display, I am not going to display them all at the same time. I am not going to display 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through 100, because that will be too much. What I am going to do is that I am just going to display a limited amount of pages. So for example, if the user is in page 5, I can display pages 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, which are then 2 pages below 5 and 2 pages above 5. That 2 that I'm mentioning, we are going to call it the radius of our pagination component. You are going to see what I'm talking about in a few minutes. But the idea here is that we are going to use this styling for our pagination. And we are also going to use the disable and active state in order to indicate where our user can, in order to communicate the user that he cannot press a specific button, and to indicate where he is at in the pagination system. Now with this information, we can start working on our Blazor component for pagination. For that, let's go back to Visual Studio and let's go to the Solution Explorer and let's come here and let's create a new component. Let's say new item, Blazor component, and we will call it pagination. Let's start by creating a few parameters, which are the current page in which the user is in, the total pages quantity, which is this number that we are going to receive from the ASP.NET Core application, the radius, which I just mentioned, and the selected page event, which is going to tell to the parent component what page did the user select. And now let's paste this internal class. This class is going to model a link in our pagination system. For example, here we have the text property, which is the text that it is going to be displayed in a specific link like previous, next, or a number like 1, 2, 3 for the page number. This is the actual value of the page that the user is going to navigate to if he or she clicks on a link. We have enabled, which says if a link is enabled or not. Here we can put a default value of true, and active to indicate the page in which the user is in through the UI of the component. Now we are going to use the onParameterSet method of the lifecycle of a component. onParameterSet allows us to define a method that it is going to be run every time the value of a parameter is changed. Let's say onParameterSet, and we will call a method called loadPages. And let's create this method now. Private void loadPages. And here we are going to build the logic necessary for our pagination system. We will start by creating a field here that is going to be a link of our link model. We will call it links, and we will say links equal to a new empty list. Let's create a variable here, is previous page link enabled, which is going to tell us if the link to the previous page is going to be enabled or not. And for that we need to say current page is different than 1, of course, because the previous link is only going to be enabled if we are not in the first page. And let's say previous page, and we can just say current page -1. And let's say links, add new link model, and we will say previous page, if it is enabled or not, and the text is going to be previous. Now we need some logic for the number of pages that we're going to display. Remember that we're going to use this radius number that we have here in order to limit the amount of pages that we're going to display. First, we will make a for. We'll say from 1, and we're going to count to the total pages quantity, and we're going to count one by one, and we're going to say if I current page minus the radius and I less than or equal current page plus radius. Basically what we're saying here is that we're trying to determine whether this number that we have here is around the current page by a distance less than this radius that we have here. So again, if the radius is equal to 2 and we are on page 5, then that means that we are only going to display pages 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. 2 below 5 and 2 above 5 also. So now let's say links, add new link model. We are going to pass the current page and we are going to say active if and only if the current page is equal to this number that we have here. And now let's do the same thing that we did here, but for the next link. We're going to say is next page link enabled, and this is only going to be true if the current page is different than the total pages quantity. That means that we're not in the last page, and the next page number is going to be equal to the current page plus 1. Now let's say links, add new link model, next page is next page link enabled, and next. Now that we have this, let's go and work with the UI. For that, we're going to paste the following code. Here, we're using Bootstrap code to display the links of the pagination system. We're iterating the links field that we have here, and we're saying for each link, you are going to create this structure, which, as you can see, we are saying that if the link is not enabled, then we are going to use the disabled class, and if the link is active, then we are going to use the active class. And we're displaying the text of the link. Now, if you click on a link, we are going to fire this selected page internal method, which we're going to define right now. So let's copy this, and let's come down here, and let's say private async task selected page internal, and we're going to receive a link model here. Now, the reason why we're doing this is that we want to validate first whether the user should have been able to navigate to the page or not. For example, if page is equal to the current page, which means that the user clicked on the current page that he's in, then we're just going to return, because we don't want the user to navigate to the same page that he's already in. And we're going to say if link wasn't enabled. If the link was not enabled, then we're also going to return. Now we can say current page is equal to the page that the user clicked on. And now we're going to say await, because we want to fire this selected page event callback to let the parent component know that a page was selected. So we're going to say selected page, invoke async link page. And now let's use this pagination component from our index component. For that, we're going to go to the Solution Explorer. Let's go to Pages, People, Index. And here we have our generic list, which is displaying the list of people. Above it, we can use our pagination component. And we need to pass it a few parameters, like the total pages quantity, which is going to come from the ASP.NET Core app, total pages quantity, the current page, and the radius. We can say that it is going to be 2. And of course, the selected page method, which is going to fire when the user selects a new page. We can call that selected page also. And now let's create these two fields and this method. let's go down here and let's say private int total page quantity, private int current page, which by default is going to be equal to 1. And now let's come here to the load people method. We're going to say page equal to 1. We're going to receive two parameters here, the page and int and the quantity per page to display. By default it is going to be 10. And here we can use a string interpolation to pass the two values. Remember that here in the people controller we set from query, which means that we can use query strings. For that we're going to say then query string here, page equal to page, which is this parameter that we have here, and quantity per page, which is this one, and let's use a lowercase q, and here we will say also quantity per page. Now with this we are using the query strings in our HTTP request, but getJSON async does not allow us to read the header of the HTTP response. For that we're going to have to ditch this method and use getAsync, and we're going to say HTTP response because getAsync returns a HTTP response, and with that HTTP response we will be able to read the header of the HTTP response. Now let's come here and let's say if HTTP response was successful, is successful, then we want to do something. If it isn't successful for any reason, you can handle the error here, but we're not going to worry about that. What we are going to do is that we're going to say total page quantity equal to int.parse, and we're going to say HTTP response headers get values, and here we will put this key that we used here, and then we're going to say first or default. This way we are reading this value that we have here. Now let's read the response. Var response string await HTTP response content read as a string, and now we're going to deserialize this string into a list of people. So let's say people equal to JSON serializer, and for that we need to import system.text.json using system text JSON, and let's say deserialize list of person, and we're going to pass it the response string, and we need to use some serializer options that say that the property name case insensitive is going to be true. And now that we have this, the last piece of the puzzle that we need is to implement this selected page method that we have here, which is rather simple. We're going to say private async task selected page int page. Here we're going to say current page equal to this page await load people, and we're going to pass this page that we receive here, and that's it. Now we can compile our application. We're going to press Ctrl F5 to run our application. Let's close this. Let's go to people, and here we have our pagination component. Here you can see that previous is marked as disabled. You can see that the page 1, which is the default page, is marked as active, and you can see that we have page 2, page 3, and next. If I click on next, you can see that we have a change here, and we see that the component is updated. Now page 2 is selected. Now previous link is enabled. I can keep pressing on next, 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 and as you can see, as we are approaching the final page, we get 10 and we're only displaying 11, and we are on the final page. We're on page 11. Next is disabled, and we're only showing 2 pages below the final page. This is the radius that I was talking to you about. You can see that if we are in page 9, we're only displaying page 7 and 8, and 10 and 11, besides the current page of course. And with this you have a pagination system that it is generic enough that you can use with any kind of records that you have, whether those are people, invoices, animals, or whatever entity that you have in your application. By using ASP.NET Core, by using generics, and by using extension methods, we were able to create a pagination system that you can reuse throughout your application. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe to my channel and let me know what you want me to cover next. Thanks.